War. It is one of the most persistent and devastating forms of human conflict. How do we make sense of the immense suffering, the strategic calculations, and the deeply personal decisions involved in warfare? For centuries, philosophers, theologians, and political leaders have tried to navigate this moral minefield, using what we now call just war theory. But it's important to understand that just war theory isn't a single, unchanging rulebook. Instead, it's a rich, dynamic tradition, a collection of competing voices that have evolved over time. To understand this tradition, we need to look at it through two fundamental ethical lenses: deontology and utilitarianism. Views on the morality of war exist on a spectrum. On one end is realism, which argues that morality simply doesn't apply to war. For a realist, war is a realm of pure necessity and self-interest, where moral talk is just idle chatter. On the other end is pacifism, which contends that war is inherently immoral and that violence only creates more violence. Just war theory seeks a middle path between these two extremes. It attempts to reconcile the strong moral presumption against taking human life with the hard recognition that force might sometimes be necessary to protect innocent lives and defend our most fundamental values. To do this, the theory makes what Michael Walzer calls a dual judgment of war. A war must be judged twice. First, we judge the reasons for going to war. This is called jus ad bellum, or justice of going to war. Second, we judge the conduct within the war itself. This is jus in bello, or justice in war. Traditionally, these two categories are seen as logically independent, meaning a just war could be fought unjustly, and an unjust war could be fought justly. The tradition has also expanded to include justice after a war ends, called jus post bellum, and even the justice of how a war is ended, or jus ex bello. Let's first look at these principles through a deontological lens. In deontology, morality is about duties, rules, and rights. Certain actions are seen as inherently right or wrong, regardless of their consequences. The focus is on the act itself, not the outcome. Several of the jus ad bellum criteria, the justice of going to war, lean heavily on deontological thinking. Just cause is the foundational, non-negotiable requirement. A war can only be just if it is fought for a reason like self-defense, the defense of others, or to right a grave injustice. Thinkers like St. Augustine saw war as a tragic necessity, permissible only to fix grave injustices and restore peace. The punishment of grievous wrongdoing is also considered a just cause. Legitimate authority. The decision to wage war must be made by a proper public authority like a sovereign state. This principle highlights the institutional and legal standing required for such a grave undertaking. Right intention. The motives for going to war must be morally pure. The goal must genuinely be to achieve the just cause, not to grab land, seek revenge, or make a profit. For example, an intention to colonize or confiscate resources would violate this principle even if a just cause was present. Deontology also provides core principles for jus in bello, or conduct within war. Discrimination, or non-combatant immunity, is perhaps the most recognized deontological rule. It demands that fighters must always distinguish between military objectives and civilians. They are only permitted to intentionally attack military targets. In this view, innocents are people who have done nothing to make themselves morally liable to be attacked. This leads to the doctrine of double effect. This doctrine addresses situations where a morally good act, like destroying a military factory, might have a foreseen but unintended bad effect, like causing civilian casualties. For this to be permissible, 4 conditions must be met. 1. The act itself must not be inherently bad. 2. The good effect is what's intended, and the bad effect is merely foreseen, not desired. 3, the good outcome cannot be achieved without the bad effect also occurring. And 4, the good effect must be proportionate to or outweigh the bad effect. Now, let's switch lenses to utilitarianism, also known as consequentialism. This approach argues that the morality of an action is determined by its outcomes. The goal is to produce the greatest good for the greatest number, or to minimize overall harm. Several criteria for going to war, or jus ad bellum, are deeply consequentialist. Last resort. War should only be chosen when all peaceful alternatives for resolving a conflict have been exhausted or are clearly not going to work. This is about avoiding the terrible costs of war if a less harmful solution exists. Reasonable chance of success. A war shouldn't be started unless there is a credible likelihood that it will achieve its just goals. Launching a war with no prospect of victory is seen as foolhardy, because it would lead to many bad consequences for no good outcome. This success can be defined not just as military victory, but as the ability to achieve a just and lasting peace. Proportionality ad bellum. This is a large-scale calculation. The total good expected to come from the war must outweigh all of the foreseen harms and costs. It asks if the universal goods to be obtained outweigh all of the universal evils that can be foreseen. Consequentialism also shapes the rules of conduct in war, or jus in bello. Proportionality in bello. This focuses on individual acts within the war. It states that the foreseen but unintended harm to civilians, often called collateral damage, must not be excessive in relation to the concrete military advantage to be gained. Necessity in bello. This principle requires using the least harmful means possible to accomplish a specific military objective. It's not about avoiding harm altogether, but about minimizing the damage inflicted while pursuing a legitimate target. This interplay between rule-based and outcome-based thinking creates constant tension and debate within just war theory. A major modern debate is over the moral equality of combatants. The traditional view, championed by Michael Walzer, holds that soldiers on both sides of a conflict have an equal right to fight each other as long as they follow the rules of war. This pragmatic approach allows war to be a rule-governed activity rather than an endless cycle of crime and punishment. But revisionist thinkers like Jeff McMahon challenge this view. They argue that the justice of a war should absolutely affect the morality of actions within it. This approach, called reductive individualism, says that killing in war must be justified by the same principles that justify killing outside of war. This leads to the idea of the moral inequality of combatants. Soldiers fighting for an unjust cause do not have the same moral right to kill as those fighting for a just one. This, however, raises a difficult question. Can an individual soldier truly know if their country's war is just, especially when faced with limited information or propaganda? This is the responsibility dilemma. Furthermore, the very nature of conflict is changing. Asymmetric warfare, terrorism, cyber attacks, and drone strikes all pose significant challenges to the traditional categories of just war theory. In the end, just war theory is not about providing simple box-ticking answers. It is a living tradition designed to cultivate our practical moral wisdom when we confront the ethics of armed conflict. It provides vital moral constraints and fosters accountability for both leaders and combatants. The ongoing, vigorous debates are not the sign of the theory's failure, but a testament to its enduring relevance and its necessary adaptation in a complex world.